A single headlamp hangs on a dark ridge, and it has stopped moving. Somewhere below, a valley full of people are asleep, unaware that a decision made hours earlier has already sealed what happens next. Mountains do not care about willpower. They do not reward confidence, and they do not negotiate. What we call mountain ego is simple: refusing to turn back, refusing to signal for help, refusing to believe the mountain's math applies to you specifically. It shows up on exposed winter ridge lines, in the thin air above 8,000 meters, and at the end of a rappel rope in a limestone canyon. Skill made the risk feel personal, and often someone else paid the bill for that confidence. In every one of these stories, the mountain offered a way out, and someone talked themselves past it. The out was there. The decision not to take it is the whole story. Here are 5 of the most egoistic hiking deaths ever recorded. It is January 18th, 2025, on the Studelgrat ridge of the Glockner, Austria's highest peak at 3,798 meters. Thomas Plamberger, 36, and his girlfriend, Kirsten Gertner, 33, set out that morning around 6:45, already roughly 2 hours behind a safe winter timetable for a route known for turning brutal when the weather closes in. Gertner was the less experienced climber of the two, and through the day they climbed slowly, until by late afternoon they were near the top, less than 100 meters of climbing from the summit cross. That's close enough to smell it. Then, the hardest section of the ridge stopped them cold. Progress slowed to nothing. The light started dying, and a storm began building toward the mountain in the evening hours. By the time anyone in the valley looked up, headlamps were visible against the dark rock, holding still in a spot where climbers are not supposed to hold still. A police helicopter flew over the ridge at around 10:50 that night, close enough that a signal from below could have marked their position and pulled them off before the cold turned lethal. According to investigators, Plamberger did not flag it down. Here's where the story gets harder to explain. Just after midnight, at around 12:35 a.m., Plamberger phoned an officer. Then, prosecutors say, he switched his phone to silent and put it away. From that point on, when rescue services tried repeatedly to reach the two climbers, nothing came through. Whether silencing the phone was a decision made in exhaustion or one made without thinking, it meant that the people trying to save them could not get a call to land. What isn't in dispute is what rescuers found the next morning. Gertner never reached the summit. She collapsed roughly 30 to 50 meters below the summit cross and stayed there through the night, alone, while temperatures fell toward -10 degrees Celsius and the wind kept building. Prosecutors say Plamberger failed to use the bivouac sack or the emergency blankets that could have shielded her from the wind. He did not remove her heavy backpack, which she was still wearing, its straps cutting into her shoulders while she sat in the snow. Nobody had gotten her into any kind of shelter. By morning of January 19th, hypothermia had taken her. Innsbruck prosecutors charged Plamberger with grossly negligent manslaughter, built around a specific set of allegations: that he pushed forward with a partner who lacked his experience, that he pressed on past the point where turning back was still an option, that he failed to signal the help that flew directly over them, and that once things went bad, he failed to do the basic things that keep a person alive in the cold. The charge carried a statutory maximum of 3 years. On February 20th, 2026, an Innsbruck court found Plamberger guilty. He received a 5-month suspended prison term and a fine of roughly €9,500. He had pleaded not guilty, arguing that the two were equal partners and that Gertner had told him to leave her. The prosecution countered that as the far more experienced climber, he carried the responsibility for both of them. Both sides filed appeals, so even that verdict is not yet final. What is settled is the outcome that no appeal can touch. A young woman froze to death a few dozen meters from a summit on a night when a helicopter had passed close enough to see if anyone below had waved it down. The 2019 climbing season on Mount Everest ended with 11 people dead, and the number that made headlines wasn't the death toll. It was 381, the record number of summit permits Nepal issued that spring, each one sold for around $11,000. Add in the roughly equal number of Sherpas and guides working the mountain, and more than 800 people were funneling toward a single summit ridge that season. On May 22nd, Nepali mountaineer Nirmal Purja, known as NIMS, took a photograph near the summit ridge that would end up everywhere. It showed a line of climbers strung along the route in full-down suits, packed shoulder to shoulder, waiting their turn like commuters on a platform. Furia estimated around 320 people were in that line the day he shot it, except this platform sat above 8,000 meters, in the zone climbers call the death zone, because that's where the human body starts dying no matter what you do about it. Here's what that queue actually cost. Above 8,000 meters, the body burns through its limited store of oxygen and doesn't replace what it loses. Every extra minute standing still in that line is a minute your blood oxygen keeps falling, your judgment keeps slipping, and your fingers and toes move closer to frostbite. Climbers on the mountain that week described waits of an hour or more, stuck behind slower parties on fixed ropes, burning summit day oxygen they'd budgeted for climbing, not standing. Some ran out entirely before they got back down. By the time the season closed, 11 climbers were dead. In the days right after the traffic jam photo went viral, Everest chronicler Alan Arnett said as many as 5 of the deaths might have been tied to crowding. But by the time he wrote his full season summary, he had walked that back hard, concluding that overcrowding was not the primary cause of most of the deaths that year. His considered verdict pointed instead at inexperience, thin guiding, and the ordinary lethality of extreme altitude. The queue made a bad situation worse. It did not, on its own, do all the killing. Even so, experienced guides didn't hold back on what they'd seen. In June 2019, interviews carried by Reuters and National Geographic delivered a blunt message from mountaineers who'd spent decades on 8,000-meter peaks. A lot of the people in that photograph shouldn't have been there. One veteran climber used the word incompetent outright. Another told National Geographic that local companies were taking inexperienced, incompetent people and pulling them up the mountain. Guides described watching clients without basic rope skills, clip and unclip at every anchor, some using ascenders on flat ground, adding 10 or 15 seconds to every transition, multiplied across hundreds of anchors and hundreds of bodies on summit day. That's where the ego in this story gets complicated, because it isn't just the climbers. Local operators, competing hard for a slice of a booming market, were selling permits and guiding packages to clients who hadn't proven they belonged above 8,000 meters. The incentive ran toward revenue, not readiness. Nobody forced any single client to make a bad call in the death zone, but somebody sold them the ticket to be there in the first place, and somebody signed off on their fitness to climb it. This is worth separating clearly from what happened on Everest in 1996, and we'll get there next. That disaster came down to one guide's loyalty to one client. A single decision made under pressure high on the mountain. What happened in 2019 was different in scale and shape. Hundreds of individual egos, hundreds of individual clients, each convinced they personally could handle the world's highest peak, backed by operators willing to take their money on that assumption. No single decision caused 11 deaths. A traffic jam of confidence did, one client at a time, strung along a ridge in a photograph that told the whole story without a caption. It is August 2025 on Victory Peak, known locally as Jengish Chokusu, and to Russian climbers as Pik Pobeda, a 7,239-meter mountain on the Kyrgyzstan side of the Tian Shan Range, considered one of the hardest peaks in Central Asia to climb safely even in good conditions. Russian mountaineer Natalia Nagovitsina, 47 years old and from Moscow, was descending from near the summit on August 12th when a partner fell and pulled her down with him, breaking her leg at around 7,150 meters, an altitude where the body is already running on borrowed time. A broken leg on flat ground is an inconvenience. A broken leg at 7,150 meters is something else entirely. She couldn't walk, she couldn't self-rescue, and at that altitude, deep in what climbers call the death zone, nobody survives an immobilizing injury alone for long. The cold alone can finish what the fall started, long before starvation or thirst get the chance. What followed was nearly 2 weeks of rescue attempts, one after another, each one running straight into the same wall, the mountain itself. Teams tried on foot and were turned back by terrain and weather that made climbing to her position nearly impossible for anyone not already acclimatized at that height. A helicopter went up carrying rescuers and a pilot and came down hard in turbulence, a crash landing that injured people who had gone up specifically to bring her down. Another helicopter turned back before it could even get close, beaten by zero visibility. Victory Peak was making it clear that this rescue would cost more than anyone had accounted for. One person did reach her. Italian climber Luca Sinigaglia, 49, a cybersecurity professional from Milan, was a longtime climbing friend of Nagovitsina from a prior expedition in the region. Around the middle of August, he climbed up toward her position carrying a tent, a sleeping bag, food, water, and a gas cooker. Supplies that might buy her time while the larger rescue effort kept trying to find a way in. He reached her. He gave her what he'd carried, then he started back down. He never made it. On roughly August 16th, Sinigaglia died descending near 6,900 meters from a combination of hypothermia, oxygen deprivation, and suspected high-altitude cerebral edema, the same conditions that make every hour that high a countdown regardless of skill or intention. His family would later say he was the kind of person who never left anyone behind, and that this act, whatever it cost him, was exactly who he was. It's also, without needing embellishment, exactly the risk that mountain carries. Reaching someone stranded that high can kill the person doing the reaching just as easily as it can save the person waiting. There's a harder detail folded inside this one. In the first hours after her leg broke, other climbers were still nearby on the descent, and some of them kept going down rather than stay with her at that altitude. A choice that is brutal to read on paper, but that the death zone makes coldly rational. Staying too long that high can mean two bodies instead of one. That is the arithmetic the mountain forces, and it is the same arithmetic that killed the one man who chose to ignore it and climb back up to her. After Sinigaglia's death, the weather kept worsening. Temperatures at night dropped toward minus 23 degrees Celsius, with wind and snow closing off what little visibility remained. Around the end of August, rescue officials in Kyrgyzstan said what the mountain had already made obvious. No further attempt could be made without risking more lives on top of the ones already lost. The operation was officially suspended. What happened to Nagovitsina after that is where the record gets uncertain. Drone footage on August 16th and again on the 19th reportedly showed her alive inside her tent, moving, at one point waving. A later drone pass in early September over the same spot showed no signs of life. Kyrgyz authorities have described her as missing and presumed dead, based on the conditions and the time elapsed, with any recovery of her body deferred to the following year. This is not a case where the ending simply wasn't dramatic enough to report. It's a case where the mountain swallowed the final chapter before anyone could document it, and where honesty means saying plainly that we don't know for certain what became of her. It is May 10th, 1996, on Mount Everest, and by the end of the storm, 8 climbers will be dead, the worst single-day toll the mountain had seen to that point. Among them, Rob Hall, one of the most respected guides in the business, and his client Doug Hansen, a postal worker from Renton, Washington who had spent years and a small fortune trying to stand on top of the world. That fortune matters here. Hall ran Adventure Consultants, a commercial guiding company, and his clients paid around $65,000 for the chance to summit, notably more than his competitors charged. That kind of money buys more than logistics and oxygen bottles. It buys expectation. Clients, trained for years, took leave from careers, told friends and family what they were setting out to do. By the time they were standing at Camp 4, the summit wasn't just a mountain anymore. It was something already half paid for. To manage that pressure, Hall had built in a safeguard, a turnaround time, set at 2 in the afternoon. Whatever your progress, whatever your excuse, you were supposed to start down by then, no exceptions. Hall called it absolute law beyond appeal. He'd said it to his clients before, more than once, in exactly those words. It was the one rule on the mountain that wasn't supposed to bend for anybody, including the man who made it. Doug Hansen had already failed once. He'd attempted Everest with Hall the year before and turned back short of the top, and he'd come back in 1996, older, more determined, and by all accounts unwilling to accept a second defeat. On May 10th, Hansen was still climbing well past the 2 o'clock deadline Hall himself had set, reaching the summit around 4:30 in the afternoon, the last person to top out that day. He wasn't moving fast. He was moving anyway. The tragedy of that late summit is that it should never have happened. 2 o'clock came and went while Hansen was still climbing, and the rule Hall had called beyond appeal was the thing that should have turned him around then and there. Instead, the man who wrote the rule watched his most determined client push past it and did not enforce it. Some accounts suggest Hall felt he owed Hansen the top after turning him back the year before. Whatever the reasoning, the deadline that existed precisely for a moment like this quietly failed at the exact moment it mattered. On the descent, above the Hillary step, things came apart. The Sherpa guide Ang Dorje encountered Hansen there, ordered him down, and Hansen refused to move. He was badly depleted and nearly out of oxygen. Hall reached them and made a choice that would define the rest of his life, however short that turned out to be. Rather than leave Hansen alone up there, he sent the Sherpas ahead to help other clients and cache oxygen, and he stayed. From that moment, Hall's fate and Hansen's were tied together, high on the mountain, exactly as the weather turned. What had been a stable morning collapsed into a full whiteout by early evening, snow and wind erasing the fixed ropes and the visible trail back to camp. Temperatures dropped fast. Neither man could get down. Hansen died somewhere around the Hillary step during the descent, in conditions so violent that his body was never recovered, believed to have fallen away down the Kangshung face. Hall survived the night, barely, radioing at first light to say he was still alive, still trapped near the south summit, his hands and feet already ruined by frostbite. Later, in one of the most quoted exchanges in mountaineering history, he was patched through by satellite phone to his wife, Dr. Jan Arnold, pregnant with their first child back in New Zealand. They talked. They chose a name for the baby, a daughter. He told her to sleep well and not to worry too much. Not long after, he stopped responding. His body was found near where he'd made that last call. It's worth saying plainly, Scott Fisher, the leader of a separate expedition on the mountain that same night, also died in the storm, but from a different chain of decisions entirely, lower on the southeast ridge. His death happened alongside this one, not inside it, and folding the two together blurs what actually went wrong on Hall's side of the mountain. What fixed this story in public memory wasn't the death toll. It was Jan Krakauer, a journalist who'd been climbing with Hall's team on assignment for Outside magazine, who turned the disaster into Thin Air, an account so detailed and so widely read that it became the lens through which the whole industry has been judged ever since. The moment commercial confidence met a turnaround time that was supposed to be beyond appeal and wasn't. It is November 27, 2019, at El Potrero Chico, a limestone canyon in Nuevo León, Mexico, known for long, clean sport routes and a steady stream of climbers from all over the world. This one didn't happen on a hiking trail. It happened on a rope, on a wall, on a descent. But the same mountain ego that killed people on Everest and the Glockner was just as present here, dressed up in climbing gear instead of crampons. Brad Gobright had a reputation before he ever touched this wall. He was known for free solos, climbing hundreds of feet with no rope and no room for error, and for setting the speed record on the nose of El Capitan in 2017, a route most climbers take days to finish. In interviews over the years, Gobright had described risk as something close to essential, a part of the craft rather than a cost of it. Other elite climbers, people who themselves climbed without margin, said openly that Gobright's tolerance for danger went further than what they considered responsible. That day, he'd climbed El Sendero Luminoso with a partner named Aidan Jacobson, a demanding multi-pitch route around 1,500 feet tall on the El Toro Formation, and Gobright had on-sighted the whole thing, climbing every pitch clean on his first try. By afternoon, both men were heading down together, sharing a single 80-meter rope and a simo-rappel, each descending at the same time, their weight counterbalancing across the anchor. Here's the detail that decided everything. The two ends of the rope were uneven, and the strand on Gobright's side, its end lost in vegetation below, did not reach the next anchor. Neither man had tied a stopper knot in the ends, a basic safety step that costs seconds and exists for exactly this situation. In a simul-rappel, if one climber runs off the end of the rope, the other loses the counterweight instantly. They rappelled anyway, assuming the rope would carry them far enough. It didn't. Gobright ran off the short end of the rope high on the wall. Jacobson, suddenly without the counterweight holding him in place, fell too, but a shorter distance, landing on a ledge and surviving without serious injury, able to climb back and get help. Gobright had no such landing. He fell roughly 300 meters and died on the rock below. The climbing world took the death hard, and not quietly. People who'd read Gobright's own words about risk, who'd watched him talk about danger as something worth chasing rather than avoiding, saw in this accident the outcome of a philosophy he'd been describing publicly for years. Nobody claimed he wanted to die. What they said, again and again, was that a life built around treating caution as optional had finally run out of exceptions. The irony sits plainly in the facts. This was a man who had just climbed a 1,500-foot wall without a single fall, without a single mistake on rock that offered no room for one. What ended him wasn't the climbing. It was a knot nobody tied. 5 mountains, 5 different kinds of certainty. One ending, repeated with small variations. A phone switched to silent. A queue nobody would step out of. A broken leg nobody could reach in time. A turnaround time that bent for one client. A rope with nothing tied in the end. None of it was a failure of skill. Every one of these people, or the people they trusted, knew exactly what they were doing. What killed them was refusing to let the mountain have the final word. It always does.